Okay, so we're on day 3 of Colin being in the hospital. I've tried really hard to talk myself out of doing this today because there wasn't a whole lot that happened on this day. There was a lot of sitting and waiting and processing and praying, and there just wasn't a whole lot that happened. It was a lot of me in my own head and listening to doctors and just trying to absorb and understand still what we were facing. And they started rewarming him on this day, and after they got that part done and he was stable, then they were starting to wean off the sedatives so that we could see if there was any life in him. And while we were going through that process, I was sitting and looking at all the machines and thinking through everything that we had been through. So they had started a feeding tube because he was having blood sugar issues. It didn't help. They still had to help him regulate his blood sugar, and he wasn't digesting the feeding tube, so they ended up having to remove it because it was just backing up. He was on full dialysis. He was on a breathing tube. He was on blood pressure medication to keep his blood pressure up, to keep his heart from stopping. Nothing in his body was working on its own. And that's just not a good sign that there's any brain function there. But I was still clinging to hope that once they removed sedatives, that we would have something. And I remember one of the doctors telling me, "We just want to see if he can even blink." And I was like, really? That's what we're hoping for here? Is that he'll blink? You can't give me any more than that. But that was their high hopes, was that he would open his eyes and even blink to show some sign of life. And so we never got anything out of him. On Saturday, they had told us that they would be amputating his leg, and they never did that. He was just never stable enough that day. And I think that night, maybe early the next morning, they moved him to do a CAT scan of his brain. And I'll share more about that tomorrow. It was just a lot of me trying to figure out what were we clinging to, because when I looked at him, there just wasn't a whole lot of, there wasn't any life in him. That day they did raise him up in the bed, just repositioned him and kind of set him up a little bit, and a lot of the swelling that had been in his face had moved down. And so he looked more like himself when I walked in that morning, and that made it a lot harder to see him like that, because he just looked more like Colin. And so today I kind of just wanted to talk about addiction and my views of it, and kind of how we hope that we have broken that cycle in our family. Of course, my kids aren't grown, and so I don't know if that's the case, but growing up, we were just around a lot of everything, a lot of drinking and things like that. And I am not handing out any fault here. That's a normal thing in a lot of homes, to drink. Or we had family who smoked marijuana, and I didn't know that. I wasn't really around it until I was a teenager, and then became a little bit more aware of some stuff, and I hated it and fought it with everything that I had. But that was kind of a common thing that you do in high school, right? You drink a little bit, you smoke a little bit, you go to parties, and it's not a big deal. You grow up, you get married, you have kids, and you stop, and you're fine. Unless you are an addict, and then it wrecks your whole life. And so if you're listening to this and you're like, well, how do I know? Or, how do I keep my kids from it? And we just don't allow anything in our home. We don't allow our kids to be around it, because I don't know if my kids have addictive personalities, and I'm not willing to gamble with their lives. To me, it is a life or death decision to allow my kids to consume alcohol, or to take pain medication. You can't always avoid that. Sometimes you have to have that. But we just talked to him about it, and we tried to make them very aware of our family history and how prone to it they might be, and that it is a gamble. Whenever you pick up a substance, if you have an addictive personality, it could literally be the beginning of the end of your life. And I think when I was a teenager and I fought Colin on all those things, it was like I knew that eventually that would be what took him away from me. And it did. And I had my days where I drank and I partied and carried on, and thank the Lord, I do not have an addictive personality. I abused the alcohol, but I was never dependent on it. And that was the only thing that separated me and Colin. I tested it with everything that I had. I just didn't have the same addictive personality that he did. And so that's something that you have to evaluate for your home and for your family and for your kids, and decide, is it worth it? And for us, it just absolutely is not worth them ever touching it. And we talked to him about Colin. I mean, they know him, even though, well, my youngest two, they have no memory of him. And the older two, the memory is very, very faint. If it's even really there at all, it might be more from the stories that we've told. But they've watched me grieve. They've watched me miss him for their whole lives. And so they know what it can cause. And so we've just stayed very open and very honest with them about it. And, we try to teach them not to be judgmental of other people, because some people can have a drink and it doesn't ruin their lives. And that's, good for them. But that might not be the case for my kids. It runs so strong in our family that I am just not willing to chance it. I'm not going to lose one of my kids to addiction. And that is just something that I stand on. I mean, I cannot tell you how I've talked to them and warned them and threatened them that they are not to ever touch any of it, because it just scares me. It's one of my biggest fears, is that one of my kids will become addicted to a substance, whether it be alcohol or heroin or, and they seem to get there so much quicker now. Like whenever we were growing up, it was rare to have anything more than marijuana. And now you have kids in high school with heroin and fentanyl and all of these substances that are just so much more dangerous than anything that we could ever dream of. And it really didn't take Colin very long to get there either. And even if he had turned from his addiction and been able to overcome it, he had Hep C. He was going to face that battle for the rest of his life because of choices that he made so young. So young. He was only 25, and he had a disease that was going to make his life very difficult. So I'm happy to talk to anyone who is maybe fearful of that in their own family or their own kids. And ultimately, the best thing for you to do is to have a relationship with Jesus. And I would also love to talk to you about that. It completely changed my life. And I can tell you, if I was not in church, if I didn't have a strong church family and a strong relationship with God, whenever Colin overdosed, I don't know where I would have ended up. It probably wouldn't have taken long, and I would have been right there with him, because I couldn't handle it on my own. I needed the Lord to carry me and to walk me through that season. And so I just want to encourage you, if you're struggling with addiction, that needs to be the first place that you go. Go find a church home, go find a church family, and start seeking a relationship with God. And He can help you. He can give you the strength to turn from it. I mean, I have a testimony all of my own, that apart from Colin's, that I would love to share with anyone. I'm not going to do it here because it's just too much. But if you want to have a sit down face-to-face conversation, I can tell you about all of the things that the Lord brought me through. I'm not ashamed of it. I'm not embarrassed. Like, I was a mess and God got a hold of me and completely changed my life. And I believe that he was working on Colin too in the last few months that he was here with us. And so I'll share a little bit more tomorrow. Again, tomorrow there's not a lot. Monday's our hard day. It'll be a rough one for me, I'm sure. But I hope that this is reaching whoever it needs to be reaching. I still don't even know why I'm doing it, because I hate it. I hate reliving it, and I hate seeing my face and my voice on a camera, but I feel like the Lord led me to do this, and so I'm just trying to be obedient to what He's asked me to do. I thank all of you who are watching and listening and just supporting me in it.